Hello everyone, how's it going? I know this is very, very late considering the game has come out for a long time, but I need to have my thoughts, recorded about this game because I feel like it deserves a lot more recognition that it's going to get because it released in a very, I would say, in between period between a lot of high acclaimed releases. The biggest being, of course, Call of Duty. It came out during that window, which is probably not the best idea. But overall, A Plague Tale Requiem. I honestly thought this was an incredible game. Now, the first game was a sleeper hit. A lot of people did enjoy it. It started to spread. Word of mouth came out about this game. And A Plague Tale Innocence was extremely well thought out, good story, well paced. The story itself is basically Amicia finds out her brother Hugo has this infection called the macula, which allows him to control plague rats, which unfortunately also is killing him. He's going through these things called a threshold. I have an entire video explaining the process. I'll leave that link below. But the story was very well constructed, paced, and ended on a high note. It took place during the Hundred-Year War, and this new game, A Plague Tale Requiem, which is part of a three-part series, it takes place a couple of months after the original game. Basically, everyone, Amicia, Hugo, their mother, and their close friend Lucas, is trying to live a peaceful life while, dealing with Hugo's infliction. Unfortunately, the plague rats have spread to the continent that they're staring at, and Hugo's macula picks up again. Now, the story is a lot more gripping this time around. They have more focus on Amicia here than they did on Hugo, as in the previous game. Her constant violent acts, her force to grow up and become the protector for Hugo, has taken a toll on her. You can In the opening level of the game, you can see her become increasingly more violent and aggressive because she essentially has become so bloodthirsty that she will do whatever it takes to protect her little brother, and it's getting to her. I often forget that these are just children. Amicia is still just a kid, and often she will just look out and clearly has, I would say, the early indications of PTSD. Like, there's this very cool scene where she's looking at a flame as she hears the screams of the people she has killed. And it definitely affected her more than it did Hugo. Hugo was still in that innocent state where he doesn't really understand what he was doing. All he wanted to do was be with his mother. And because of that, it didn't have such an impact on him, but over time it starts to bleed into him as well because he's also growing up and realizing he is not exactly okay. He is also much more aware of his infliction because this time around it's killing him. Whereas in the previous game, it kind of hinted that he went through the worst of it and survived it. Here, it is killing him, and they have this type of fantasy element to it where he believes he can cure himself by exploring this island based on a vision. Now, the story, while extremely well thought out and considerably way more expanded on, is extremely padded out. There are certain sections in the game that simply did not need to exist. And this includes certain puzzle segments, certain combat segments. There are a lot of parts of this game that could have been trimmed. The fat could have been cut out completely. And there are a lot of, your princess is in another castle situation. But the game does have some very more highs than it does have lows. I would say about a third of the game could have been cut out completely without losing any sense of urgency or any type of important significance to it. In fact, it would have probably been much more well paced if these segments were cut out. And you'll notice them the second you play the game. The game is long. It took me about 15 hours to complete, and even though that doesn't seem that long, again, with the padded out segments, it definitely feels like it's stretched out much more than it has to. Now, in terms of visual design and presentation, the first game looked great for a AA studio, but here it's clear that the publisher gave Absorbo, the developers of this game, a lot more money to create this, and it is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, there are some technical issues here and there, like when you're turning the wheel of a crank, sometimes the animation will not complete, and I did encounter one crash, which isn't a big deal, for a game this technically amazing. I mean, there are some moments where this game is a lot more breathtaking than some AAA games. They really have some talented people on the development team for this game. It shows that these guys were passionate about these guys were passionate about this project, and it really shows in their work, from the voice acting, from the visual design, the presentation, the animation, the actors. They did a phenomenal job. I'm particularly not a fan of child actors, but here they really nailed it. So these actors have a very prosperous future ahead of them. You also have more supporting characters this time around because they really exercise their budget here, and they play a role within the gameplay elements, such as more distraction opportunities or direct combat opportunities. Now, touching on the combat, it's the same thing as the previous game. Yeah, you get a crossbow later on in the game, but it's essentially the same thing, and it's still very bad. It's at best mediocre during certain segments, but when the game forces you to engage in combat, and there are a lot of moments where they force you to fight, it becomes absolutely annoying. Amicia is not a strong person. She uses hit and run tactics or slingshot for direct hits, but for the most part, the combat, it just sucks. The stealth is okay. It's average, nothing great about it, but the stealth segments, it's encouraged for you to go through the game stealth instead of combat, even though the game has this leveling system where if you engage in one over the other, they'll give you more points based on your playstyle, which I think is a really good idea. But it's clear that combat was just not improved on as it should have been. And yeah, the leveling system has been improved on. Again, if you engage in stealth more, you get more stealth points. If you engage in combat, you get more combat points. There are a lot of hidden resources in the way of locked benches that use one-time knives. The knives serve as also a way for you to kill enemies as a one-time kill, but for the most part, yeah, it doesn't exactly mesh well because sometimes, well, 99% of the time you're going to save the knife for the benches that are locked and give you the rare resources because that's what you really want to equip Amicia with the best type of equipment. She gets some more improved sling equipment, more combat opportunities, more ways to stealthily engage enemies. So you'll generally just avoid using a knife in order to just engage within getting more resources. Now, the resource crafting system is basic. There's nothing very spectacular about it. You get more items to equip more powerful items to Amicia. Now, you won't control anyone else, which is a bit disappointing, but I will say that the game really nails the ending. Now, I won't explain the ending, but I feel like the ending is just so lukewarm and wonderful that I think it did such a great job in ending this story. Like I said, it's a 3-part story, but the ending of the story, they make you earn it. Let's say that. A lot of games don't have that type of weight to them. Like, I would say the best example of that would be The Last of Us Part 2. When Jesse died, they don't really showcase a way for you to actually connect to the character to the point when he dies. They kind of just rub it off like, yeah, Jesse died, and no one blames anyone for anything. But in this game, there are actual impacts towards the end of the game where you're finally like, wow, that was amazing. Yeah, the game was padded out, but the ending is so profoundly executed. It was well worth the journey. And the soundtrack is absolutely brilliant. I can't tell you how amazing the soundtrack for this game is. Right into the end, even the main menu soundtrack is so absolutely beautiful. I think the only other soundtrack that I just sat down and listened to it would be Scarlet Nexus. Like, the soundtrack for this game is just so absolutely breathtaking and pinpoints everything that happens within the game. Those things where you just don't notice it, and if you just remove the sound, I would actually recommend you do this. Remove the music for a certain scene that you think would not be impactful without it, and you'll see how it changes the mood. And for this game, definitely the composer nailed it for every situation. Now, the game is a lot bigger, like I stated, so there are a lot more areas for you to explore. There's a lot more bright color palettes to the visual design as opposed to the previous game where it was very dark and moody, and that's definitely here, but they exercise a lot more visual variety to the game. You have bright, colorful festivals, great moments, and this is kind of a nitpick for me, but I actually like the idea that they explored other faiths in this game. Like, Christianity played a huge role within the previous game, but in this game they showcase other faiths in a way to showcase that this thing is bigger in a lot context of the world that they live in. Like, other people live with different ideals, and they actually can live with more, I guess, morality and more freedom than certain other worlds that live within the constraints of Christianity. I'm not saying Christianity is bad. I just like the idea that, they explore new things and they don't just, isolate them to one single theme. Like in the first game was all about the Inquisitors, and then Christianity. Here they decide to expand more on it to show that Hugo's infection actually spans other religions, and they have different interpretations of how they interpret what's going on with Hugo. Because one of the first things you learn is that this is something that has been going on for a long time. And again, you'll learn that as you play the game. It is available on Game Pass, but I purchased the game because after playing through it, I think they deserve the purchase. Now, I did read if you get it on PC, I did read that there are a lot more technical issues on the PC version than the Xbox version. Like I said, I played this on Xbox Series X, so I only had one crash and that animation issue. So other than that, it's not that big of an issue. Either way, I think A Plague Tale Requiem is one of the best games this year, and it's something that a lot of people should not sleep on. I think after God of War releases and we kind of go into that period of where people have a dry spell and they want something new to play, this will gain up momentum. Already 1 million players have played the game, which I think should double. It should definitely double. But I would also recommend you play the first game first because you definitely want that experience before you play into this. While you don't need that, they actually do a pretty good job of explaining all the elements that happened in the previous game, but there are certain emotional moments in the first game that you cannot experience unless you actually play that game, because there are two characters in particular in the first game, I won't spoil it, that had such an incredible impact on Hugo, Amicia, and Lucas. They kind of are just, written out of the story in the sense, like, they do, pay homage to them, but I felt like they could have done a greater job to that, like, mentioned them to a greater degree. It kind of reminded me of Yakuza 6, Song of Life, where Kiryu kind of just mentioned Nishiki or any of the other characters that came before, but then again, that was Kiryu's attitude. His attitude was to keep moving forward and to never look back. And with this, it kind of is the opposite, because they actually showcase the importance of these bonds that these characters share, such as Amicia and Lucas, who share a much stronger bond than you could possibly imagine. In fact, they fleshed them out to the point that they become not only they family, but they love each other in such a way that they would die for one another. And it definitely is reflective of the story of how much they've experienced to one another, not as partners, romantic partners, but as like brother and sister. And I think it's very well written of how their narrative also develops along with every other character. Either way, A Plague Tale Requiem, I would just wanted to do this review to showcase how much I love this game and how much I really think people should experience it. It is one of the best games this year, and if you love dark story-driven titles like I do love the darker games in the genre, you'll definitely love this game. Especially, I know I stated that I made mention of The Last of Us. I feel like if you like that game, even I have my issues with Part 2, if you like The Last of Us, I really believe you will love this game. So that's my review on A Plague Tale Requiem. If I were to give it a score, I would give it a 9 out of 10, the highest 9 I could possibly give it, because, the combat still sucks. And that's something that really annoyed me. There was this one particular combat section towards the end of the game that made me want to hurl my controller at the wall. Like, I'm playing through the game on hard difficulty right now, and yeah, it's a lot more difficult. Oh yeah, I should make mention that the levels aren't linear anymore. There's actually more semi-open world sections of the game. You can't take on objectives in one linear fashion. They actually offer you different ways to take on everything. So I should have mentioned that earlier, but yeah. Plague Tale Requiem, absolute banger of a game. Please support the developers. Even if you get it through Game Pass, get the game. I did. Anyway, yeah, that's it.